Hi, I'm Mike Lardy.
I'm Daniel Mears.
And today's video is about being intentional. It's actually the second piece from where we left off last week. And so where we left off was that intentional leaders, they evaluate. I mean, any good coach of a team is going to evaluate his players. He's going to look at their strengths and abilities and place them where they need to be. Any good parent who's looking to raise a child, they're looking to develop them in a way so that they mature and go on to become eventually someday grown-ups and parents themselves. So all Christians begin with spiritual new birth, with coming to faith in Christ, their spiritual infant, and then they go on to develop through the rest of their lives in terms of spiritual maturity.
Yeah, and when it comes to this evaluation of spiritual maturity, there are actually 5 different stages. There's spiritually dead, spiritual infant, spiritual child, spiritual young adult, and spiritual parent. Now I want to mention a couple of things about these things and about evaluation before we go through these different levels. First of all, when we're evaluating, we're not evaluating to judge, and we're not evaluating to say one level of spirituality is better than the other. We're entirely using this as a tool, as disciple makers, to figure out where our people are at so that we can help them in their faith journey as they climb to different levels of spiritual maturity. So the first one there I listed was being spiritually dead. And I think this is probably the most obvious one when you think about death. Being spiritually dead is someone who has not been born again. They are not a Christian. They are not a believer. Their life is characterized by the word unbelief. Some things that you might hear someone who's spiritually dead say to kind of tip you off is they could say, well, just living the life the way I decided I want to live it. Oh, you go to church? Seems like a waste of time. Oh, you believe in God? I don't really believe in that stuff. Or maybe even something like, the Bible is just a book of a bunch of made-up stories, isn't it? All those would be characteristics or something that someone who's spiritually dead might say to tip you off that they're spiritually dead.
Right, and then there comes a place and a time in someone's life when they accept Christ and they continue, they start a life of faith, a life journey of faith in Jesus Christ. And so that person is known as a spiritual infant. The Bible calls them spiritually infant. And really what they are is they're just young. They're brand new. Their life is characterized by ignorance, not in terms of life, but in terms of things of spiritual things. They don't know the Bible. They just don't know spiritual things because they've never been taught, never been shown, or haven't been around other Christians that have helped them to mature yet. So their life is just kind of characterized by ignorance. And so what they might say is something like, oh, church? That's something I have to go to? Or they might be like, does it really say that in the Bible?
Yep.
And so it's just ignorant, that's all.
Yeah. The next stage, or the third stage, is spiritual child. Now, very similar to the infant, the spiritual child is still new in their faith. They're still learning the building blocks. In a lot of ways, their faith might still be kind of exciting and cute. They haven't experienced the ups and the downs and the persecution and the difficulties that sometimes come with Christianity. And so it's just still fresh and exciting. But one thing with spiritual children, and if you've had a child of your own, you understand this, is that spiritual children tend to be very selfish and self-centered. And so they're interested in pieces of the faith or pieces of the church that are meaningful and useful to them, not so much in giving themselves. And so a spiritual child is characterized by selfishness. And what they might say things like, oh, I'm supposed to give money to church? Well, there's a new video game for Xbox 360 I really wanted this week. Or they might say, I'm pretty happy with my discipleship group right now. I really don't want to see the group split into 2 pieces because all those guys there are my buddies. Or they might say, I was going to go to church on Sunday, but my friend invited me to Disneyland, and how am I going to pass that up? As you can see, a spiritual child is just someone who's centered on themselves and they haven't yet explored the part of their faith about putting others and loving others.
Right. So in the process of discipleship, then, a spiritual child moves on to become a spiritual young adult. And so you can see we're just progressing up the ladder in terms of physical stages of growth.
Yes.
It also happens in spiritual stages as well. And so a spiritual young adult is someone who is moving to become others-focused, become God-focused, God-centered. And so they might say things like, oh, you're going to the hospital to visit someone in our church? Can I go along with you and pray with you? Or they might ask, oh, you guys need help on Sunday mornings in children's? Like, that's something I really want to do. Maybe I can get a friend to come do it with me. So spiritual young adult is moving on in maturity, and they're understanding that a life that's modeled after Christ is a life of service.
Very good. And then the final stage is a spiritual parent. And it's important to note that we don't call it a spiritual adult. We call it a spiritual parent for a reason, because a parent can be in charge of, lead, and raise spiritual children up to become adults themselves. And so a spiritual parent is the highest stage of spiritual maturity, where the person is now ready to share their faith, lead others in Christ. In the magical words that we always use, they're ready to make they're ready to make disciples.
Yep.
And they're no longer selfish. They're investing their time, their resources, and even their own money in order to help others learn about Christ and become disciples themselves. And a spiritual parent might say things like, hey, do you know a couple of other guys that maybe want to be in our discipleship group? I really want to fill it up. Or I can't wait till Brian is ready to lead his own group. Or sorry, I can't make it to the hangout tonight where we're all going to go out and see a movie. I got a phone call and my church really needs some help, so I'm going to run over there and help. So things like that would characterize a spiritual parent.
Right, and so you see how it works. So if you're making disciples, if you're a disciple maker, then you've evaluated your players, and the players are the people that you serve. And so how we move them along is really there's a whole process to this, and it's something that Daniel and I love to teach. There's a training coming up. It's a disciple makers training. It's coming up next quarter, so we're going to be feeding you and releasing little bits of information about that as we get closer in the weeks to come. But just keep that in mind, that we have a process in place that helps move spiritual infants all the way through the process to where they can one day make disciples themselves. And so, is there anything else we really want to talk about?
I don't think so. I would just, like Mike said, I just really encourage you to consider that training. And if you're a disciple maker right now, evaluate your people, not to judge them, but so that you know where you want them to go next. And that's something that Mike can help you with, to coach you through that process of taking someone from one place and helping them get to another.
Right. So We're excited about this. This is exciting stuff. And Daniel and I, we are here for you. So this week, let's go out and let's make it happen.